Hi, this is Gary Whitta, and you're listening to the FSF Popcast.
The show whose interviews whoopsies make the Scarif explosion look like a small blip on the radar. But hey, we got a Ben now, so that makes us more better gooder, right?
You weren't wrong about it being a silly introduction.
Oh, we're not done.
Our show is brought to you by our charity sponsor, the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund, which supports the Wish Upon a Teen Foundation that helps out sick kids when they need it most. And just imagine the comfort you'll give Red Shirt crewman number 7567. He'll understand that when he puts on the red shirt and joins the crew of the Enterprise in their struggle against Director Krennic, that he didn't leave his family destitute and without hope, because the Red Shirt Widows and Orphan Fund has his back, and what's left of his stardust.
All right, guys, our guest today is an author, a screenwriter. He's the editor-in-chief for PC Gamer Magazine, both UK and US editions. You've seen his work with the Book of Eli and Rogue One as a screenwriter for those movies. And his latest novel, Gundog, just released for our nerdy consumption. So, yeah, we're going to want to check that out. We're going to talk to him a little bit about that as well here coming up shortly. We are very excited and ever so pleased as punch to welcome Gary Whitta to the FSF Podcast. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Hello, thanks for having me. And just to clarify, I was the editor-in-chief of PC Gamer, but not for about 20 years now. That was like a whole other lifetime for me. I started in video games. I was the editor-in-chief of PC Gamer like in the late 90s through the early aughts. And then after that, I started my career in screenwriting. So I've had this weird kind of bifurcation between two different careers.
Stupid, dumb, stupid Wikipedia.
You use
oh my
Wikipedia
God! Don't look at my.
as a
Don't look at
source?
my. It's like my Wikipedia is so wildly inaccurate. It's ridiculous.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like I rolled the dice. I rolled the dice between that and IMDb. Which one's going to be more accurate?
But Abraham
Honestly-
Lincoln told Tim he could trust everything on the internet.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
right.
this is what happens when you do your own research.
Yep. I actually did look it up on IMDb, and it still says you're editor-in-chief of PC
IMDb
Gamer.
is a mess as well. Don't believe. Look, you've got.
It's all wrong.
Just when in doubt, come talk to the source. You've got me right here. I mean, I will also tell you wildly inaccurate things about myself, but at least you'll be able to say you got it directly from me.
That's true.
I can't wait
People
to see what
wildly
else
inaccurate things
what
about
else we got
yourself
wrong.
is so much
It's
more
gonna be great.
fun.
Yeah.
This whole interview is going to be like, yeah, about that. So here we go. Here's
Yeah,
the
let me set you
actual-
straight on that one as well. Yeah.
Not now.
That means I gotta delete one of my questions, actually. I'll figure that out later.
All right. So, Gary, the one thing that I am positive about, because I got this from the source, you've been talking about this a lot on social media as of late, because I follow you on Threads and watch what you do. You released information about a book that just came out called Gundog. Now, your friend Felicia Day said on Threads that we need to check it out because it's cool and it has mechs in it. And I have a hard time arguing with Felicia's logic. That sounds amazing. So if you would please tell all the folks who are listening and watching this interview what the idea of the book is and how it came to be.
I'm so glad you brought it up. How convenient that I should be on this podcast right as I have something to promote. I love it when things just like accidentally work out that way.
Fantastic.
So yeah, Gundog is my second book. I'm a screenwriter primarily. I write for film and television, but I also like to write books and comics and other things. And this is my second book. I wrote my first Abomination back in 2015, which was kind of a gnarly medieval horror story. And this is much more kind of hard science fiction. I've always loved mecha, the whole Japanese subculture of anime and manga that deals with essentially like big giant walking tanks that knock the stuffing out of one another. I've always thought that's just such a cool world. And it's always surprised me that there's never been like much of that in the Western world. Like we love the Japanese stuff. We love Gundam and Neon Genesis, Evangelion and Macross and all this stuff. But outside of like, I don't know, Transformers aren't even really mechs, but like Pacific Rim and like Robot Jocks from back in the day, like there's not a lot of like mecha in the West, like homegrown mecha. And so I always I had an itch that I wanted to scratch. I wanted to write something with a giant mech. And that's what this is. And it's a very Americanized version of it. It's all set in a post-apocalyptic America after an alien invasion. And it's about a young girl who grows up in an alien prison camp and escapes and finds this kind of abandoned prototype for essentially a U.S. Air Force war mech that was developed to try and fight the aliens, and they weren't able to finish it in time. But she fixes it up and powers it up and becomes its pilot. and essentially uses this thing to kind of start a new human uprising against the aliens that have taken over the world. So it's it's very popcorny. I don't think it's going to win any awards or anything, but it was designed to just be a bit of fun. It's kind of just a fast page turner, popcorn roller coaster type ride, and so far people seem to be enjoying it on those terms.
I mean, you sold me on it.
Yeah. Right? I'm sitting here listening to you describe it going, well, I know what my next Audible purchase is going to be.
Well, and the nice thing is you don't even need to purchase it, because I made it in a really weird way. I wrote this book during the pandemic, and the original plan was to self-publish it, because I just wanted to see what would happen if I did something without any kind of gatekeepers or traditional publishers or anything at all. Because, the great thing these days is anyone, right? You don't need the gatekeepers anymore, right? Anyone can start a podcast or put something, or, make their own movie on their iPhone and put it on YouTube, or self-publish a book, right? You can go straight to an audience. And there have been tremendous success stories in self-publishing. Andy Weir self-published The Martian. Hugh Howey self-published Wool, which went on to be Silo on Apple TV. 50 Shades of Grey, of course, was originally like Twilight fan fiction that then blew up and became a big thing.
Right.
So you can just go straight to an audience now. And I thought, I'll do that. But one thing that I learned during that process was my wife, Leah, listens to a lot of audiobooks on Audible, like 3 books a week. Like, she's voracious audiobook consumer. And I learned through her that fully 1/3 of all books that are sold are in the audio format. Like, 1 out of every 3 people that are like buying a book, they're buying the audio book to have it read to them rather than, turning pages. And I thought, man, if I'm going to self-publish this book, I kind of have to do the audio version as well. Otherwise, it's like 1 out of 3 potential, listeners, readers that I'm not reaching. And so what was fortunate was during the pandemic, a lot of actors and people that I know from my kind of day job, my Hollywood career, were sitting around with nothing to do, right? Because all the movie sets were shut down. No one was filming anything. And I reached out to a couple of good friends of mine. One was Shannon Woodward, who was on HBO's Westworld, who's been in a bunch of really cool TV projects.
She's amazing.
Troy Baker from The Last of Us. And I said, would you be interested in narrating this book? And they did it just, for fun. And they narrated 9 hours of audio. We put Austin Wintory, a brilliant composer, put a full orchestral soundtrack on it, and we just put it out into the world for free last year as a 9-episode podcast, like a season of television. It's 9 hourly episodes, but if you listen to the whole thing, essentially that's the book. It's the audio book in episodic format, and we just released it all for free. So if you're interested in the book, but you're an audio book person rather than a page turner, a visual reader, you can just type Gundog into Audible or any podcast service, and it'll pop right up, and it's all free.
Awesome. Well, I will be doing that as soon as we hang up. Really
cool. I taught myself out of potential book sales there, but I did that when I decided to give the audio version away for free. And the original plan was to self-produce and self-publish the audio version. We put it out again. Anyone can put up a podcast. That's what we did. And the plan was to self-publish the book right after. But the podcast went on to be really successful. And a publisher approached me and said, do you want to publish the print version of the book through us? And so that's what I did. But it just took a little bit, like basically kind of restarted the whole publishing process. And so this weird thing happened where Gundog, the audio book, was out, I think, almost like a year ago. And only now, a year later, has the actual book that the audio version was translated from now on shelves. So I kind of did it in a weird way. I tend to make things up as I go. There was no like overarching like master plan or strategy to do this, which is why it ended up coming out in a weird way. But yeah, it's now available in all formats. The podcast is for free, or you can get an ebook, or you can go find an actual book on Amazon or in bookstores.
Excellent, because that's my preferred book consumption way. I used to be a really big reader when I was a kid. I was a page turner. I read a lot of the classics and all those things. And then about 17, for whatever reason, I think it was because there was girls, I stopped reading books, and I was doing stuff outside and chasing girls and, all these other things. And in the last couple of years, I've really gotten back into audiobooks, and it's a nice thing. When I'm, driving in the car today, I was listening to Justina Ireland's new version, new book about the High Ground, or not the High Ground, but the High Republic, really, excuse me. The High Ground, that was Obi-Wan. Anyway, yes. I knew where I was going with this. You didn't know where I was going with this. I knew where I was going with this. But yeah, so I just started, but that's where I spend most of my time. And if I'm going to listen to something or I'm going to read something, it means I'm going to listen to it. So yeah, I'm excited to know that's available.
Yeah, you'll like it. And like I said, it's broken down into these episodic chunks. So there's like natural, you can binge the whole thing. If you want to take a break, there's kind of like natural cliffhanger type stopping points as well. It's cool.
Love it. That's fantastic.
I'm more than likely going to grab both because I flip flop between like a physical thing I can hold and just listening. So the fact that I can get both versions is fantastic. So
it's interesting. I've thought about this a lot about whether or not when someone says, I've read that, but it was the audiobook. Like, I don't know. I thought it's interesting because I made an audiobook, but I'm not really an audiobook listener. I prefer to read, right? I'm more of a visual reader. But I mean, I don't know if there's any science behind it, like whether or not you consume or absorb a book in the same way when it's being read to you by a narrator rather than you. Because I like to like stop and linger on a sentence or a phrase and read the book at my own pace. And obviously you can pause it as well, but like I just like to look at words. But obviously it's not. And I there are people that I know who listen to audiobooks at like 1.5 or like 2x speed because they can speed read the books.
Oh, I can't do that.
Which is like crazy. But some people are, everyone's different. Everyone's brain is wired differently. I know people that listen to podcasts at like, twice the speed because they can listen to twice as many podcasts. But I know everyone kind of sounds like they're on helium. It's very strange to me. But yeah, everyone's different. And that's why we made it this way. The very, very first thing, or the most common question I got when I announced the book was, is there an audiobook? And I was like, yeah, it's you can actually go listen to it for free. So we've tried to cater to everyone.
That's fantastic.
I'm totally guilty of doing the audiobook with the physical book. Like I will read it while listening to it.
Oh, really?
I have both inputs. Then I'm watching the words as I'm listening to the words, and somehow that gets it ingrained in there a little bit further.
Oh, that's interesting. It's kind of like watching a movie with the subtitles on and reading the subtitles at the same time.
My wife does the exact same thing.
See, I wonder if that's part of it, is that I can focus on both, because like when I read, I have a tendency to jump further down and then realize that I didn't actually read the paragraph, like I don't remember it. But if I have the speed like regulated with the audiobook and I'm following along with the words, then I actually like focus on them better.
That's interesting.
That's harder for me to do while I'm driving, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally get that.
Maybe not while you're driving.
Can you not get like a book holder to like clamps onto your steering wheel? That would surely solve the problem.
I just use a big rubber band
as much as you like.
Just rope it down. It'll be fine.
Yeah, just tie off the steering wheel.
Yeah, tilt your head every time while you're reading.
I mean,
people think I'm singing.
I have a friend who for a long time put her Kindle over her speedometer.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, I don't ride with her.
Oh, no.
I don't ride with her. It's a dangerous idea.
When it comes to audiobooks, that is like you tap into an entirely new section of people, whether it be people that are slightly neurodivergent like me. I have ADHD. I get both because there are some days where I cannot sit still long enough to physically read a book. So I have to put the laundry away and listen to it. I have to do something else and then absorb the book that way. Or there's people like my wife has dyslexia, where some days she reads the same word over and over and over again, and it just doesn't click. So
it's so interesting because you and I have a lot in common, because I'm also ADHD, like severely chronic. Like I remember when I took the test, the doctor at the end said, I said, do I have HD? He's like, oh, yeah, I think there's like 98th percentile or something. It was really bad.
Yeah, that's the joke that I love. It's like, I don't know what HD is, but I got 80 of them.
It was a test they gave me. It was I don't know how you were diagnosed or whatever, but it was a laptop, and they set up a little program. And it's like every time a letter pops up on the screen, press the space bar. Unless it's the letter X, in that case, don't press the space bar. I flunked it so badly because like even like right as the test is beginning, I'm like looking at the little Windows logo on the little sticker, going, oh, that's interesting. They put a sticker on it. Like, I'm already like off somewhere else, and I'm trying. Like this is the one time when I'm like actually trying to focus because my ADHD is being tested, and also my wife has dyslexia, and one of the things that I learned from that's really interesting. There are special typefaces that you can get. Like so when I give her, since I ask her to read, when I asked her to read my book, or if I ask her to read scripts, sometimes I'll give her the raw text, she'll import it into her whatever it is that she has on her iPad or whatever, and just copy it all into these very special fonts and typefaces that are made to be more easily read and understood by dyslexic readers, which I thought was really interesting.
And it's
It's
really
very cool.
Yeah, that it's the same thing. My wife Mimi has a Nook instead of a Kindle.
Mhm.
Same thing. You could just upload it in the dyslexia font, and that's the only thing she can read with for the most part, or at least her preferred form. Because there are days where she goes through the same sentence back and forth, and it just doesn't click in there.
Interesting.
But at the
I
same
think a lot
time,
of it is-
she eats through 80 books a year. So
right.
Yeah, and that's the thing. My wife reads way more books than me because it's just an easier way for she can, like I say, she can do it while she's doing other things. And I think sometimes in some cases, like your case, it is because of ADHD. It's like the only way you can't focus. But I think with a lot of people, and with my wife, it's like she doesn't have time to sit and read, and so the only way to read is while she's also like is basically doubling up and doing it while she's doing something else. When our second child was born, you know, she spent a lot of time in a chair nursing, you know, for hours, you know, sometimes for hours, getting our baby to sleep. And she would put the AirPods in and she would listen to, you know, trashy murder novels and stuff like that while she was with our baby. So it's sometimes it's a practical thing as well. Like, so when you're driving, I always have music or something on in the car. For some reason I can't listen. I have a hard time listening to podcasts and like spoken word stuff, but I love to listen to music in the car all day long. And if I don't have that, it feels very lonely.
Yes, agreed.
And now, a word from our show sponsor, Level Up Sabers. Their link can be found in the show notes. So Tim typically steals this question for the first question of the interview, but wanting to talk about your book first, I totally understand because it sounds fascinating. But usually he asks what our guest's origin story is. So what got you started in writing?
I grew up so I'm originally from the UK. I grew up in London, and I was a super nerd. I grew up on American popular culture because we certainly did then, and we still do today. In the UK, we import a lot of our popular culture, right? Brits love Star Wars too, and Star Trek, and Doctor Who, and Knight Rider, and Battlestar Galactica, and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and Blake Seven, and everything that we grew up on. And I grew up in the 80s when, you know, video gaming and computer gaming was just really getting started. I had an Atari 2600, I had a Commodore 64, and I loved video games. And I also loved movies. I just voraciously, I had such a collection of VHS tapes back in the day. I'm dating myself, but those were I grew up loving movies and video games. And I didn't like school very much, but because I was a nerd before it was cool to be a nerd, so I kind of got pushed around. Now every celebrity's like, oh, I'm such a nerd. Please give me a job on a Marvel movie because I love this stuff. But it's all, you can kind of tell like the fakers from the real ones. I paid my dues. I got kicked around the schoolyard when I was a kid for like, you know, for being into like Star Trek and stuff before it was cool to be into that stuff, and comic books and so forth. And I always imagined that, like, because English was the only subject at school I was any good at. I used to write short stories, and I again, like Douglas Adams and people like that were huge science fiction authors. Were a huge. That's what I just read that stuff all day long. That's just what I wanted to do. And I saw Star Wars, and it's like, that's what I want to do. I want to make stuff like that. That is so cool. And I always imagine like maybe I can get a job in video games. Maybe I can get a job in movies and television. I don't know, like either one of those would be great. And I ended up getting a job in video games. I worked for video game magazines for many years, started out reviewing video games, and eventually became editor of PC Gamer, and which is a magazine that started in the UK, and then they launched a US edition in the late 90s, and that's what brought me out here. I moved out here from the UK to run the American edition of PC Gamer, and I did that for a few years, and then the company that employed me kind of went belly up during the great .com crash of like 2001. And I found myself suddenly out of a job and thinking about, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to go back to doing what I was doing? I had a pretty good career in video games at that point. I had a good resume. I could have got another job in games. But I thought, I don't know, maybe, you know, sometimes, you know, life has a way of like forcing you out of your comfort zone and giving you the opportunity to make a different choice. And so, well, let me try I'm in California now. I'm only a few hundred miles from LA. I don't know. Let's try it. Let's see. And I had enough money saved up to live very, very frugally without a job for about a year. And I lived off, canned soup and ramen noodles. And I tried to teach myself to write screenplays. And I wrote a bunch of them, each one slightly less terrible than the last, until I had one that I wasn't ashamed to show to somebody, and started showing it around to people and managed to get the attention of, a manager. And that was the beginning of my screenwriting career. What would have been like, circa 2002, something like that. So I've been doing this now for more than 20 years.
Fantastic.
Awesome. I listening to your list of things that you enjoyed with the Brits like Star Wars and Star Trek and Doctor Who, and I'm like, Americans like Doctor Who.
Well, that's the thing. It goes both ways, and we Brits do have a tremendous track record when it comes to science fiction, right? Like I said, Doctor Who, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Blake Seven. I mean, there's and a lot of it is like only Doctor Who obviously has become hugely popular in recent years, but a lot of the stuff that we're known for is kind of cheesy, kind of culty stuff and shows that aren't hugely popular. But we did, some of the greatest science fiction writers in history have come from are Brits, and so we've got a good track record there. But when it comes to like film and television, there's a tremendous amount of snobbery in the UK about this stuff. Like you don't see a lot of science fiction made outside of Doctor Who anymore, and I don't know if it's not like Downton Abbey or something that's perceived to be upmarket or proper, or like some kind of Jane Austen adaptation or whatever. It's very hard to get any traction. Whereas here in America, everything is Hollywood and popular culture, and like we love all this stuff. The more robots and ninjas and aliens, the better.
Right.
And so that's why what I grew up on. I grew up primarily on a diet of American sci-fi, fantasy, popular culture. And so, you kind of got to go to the place where they make that stuff if you want to be a part of it. And so that's what I did.
I have to say though, I have a soft spot for like classic British sci-fi, like the retro, the old Doctor Who. Horrible as it is, like as low as the production quality is, I love them so much. And I actually have the 6-part Hitchhiker's Guide on DVD. Like I have which is also version. Very from a production standpoint very wobbly. It is, but it's so much better than the Hollywood motion picture version of it.
If you can set the production values aside and appreciate that, like every Doctor Who planet was basically the same quarry in southeast England. I mean, it's funny. Everyone, nostalgia, I think, affects a lot of this. Somebody told me once that everyone thinks the best era of music is whatever was around when you were 16 years old, right? Like, and that's true. I'm a child of the 80s, so I like 80s music. And for me, when you say Doctor Who, I think about Tom Baker. And if you say to me Star Wars, I think about the original trilogy, because that's what it was around when I was coming up. And the stuff that makes its mark on you when you're young and impressionable, that is the stuff that is that ends up kind of being most resonant. So I mean, I went back and looked at Doctor Who recently because it's one of the streaming services has all of it, and nostalgia is a tricky thing. Like it can be tough to go back and look at something that you loved as a kid and now as an adult go, oh, that set almost fell over.
Oh, I know.
Like you can see the boom arm in that shot, and it's like it's all very shaky, and HD has not done anyone any favors.
When you look at the original makeup. When you look at the original Daleks, and they are trash cans with a plunger and a whisk.
They had a budget of like $30,
and that is kind of the charm, and I think it's testament to the strength of the storytelling of something like Doctor Who that it can we were all enraptured by it, even though like at the time you could tell like this is like, because then there was like a lot of the Doctor Who that I love came out like after Star Wars showed you what science fiction can look like. It's, oh my God, that looks amazing. But then Doctor Who keeps coming out on these like much cheaper BBC budgets, but like it didn't matter, right? Because the story and the characters, like it was so cool that you didn't mind that the Daleks looked like trash cans.
Right.
And I think that says so much about it, like you said, with the story and it wouldn't have lasted 60 years if it wasn't worth it, if it wasn't good. Like the story and the characters are so much. Yeah,
and it's really the opposite end of the spectrum that we of course already know, which is you can spend $250 million on state of the art visual effects and you can blow up a million planets, but if there isn't an interesting story or compelling characters at the heart of it, like it's all for naught, right? No one cares.
Right.
Exactly.
And again, Doctor Who shows that because they don't have any of those things, but they do have good characters, and they do have good storytelling, and so that's what keeps you coming back. It's why low budget sci-fi can still be really, really interesting, because you can do a lot with very little these days.
Agreed.
We need more low budget sci-fi. I want to very clearly tell that the background is literally painted on. Like, I need more of that.
I don't know if you've ever seen Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. It's one of the best television shows I've ever seen. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was a show that came out of the UK several years ago, and it's kind of a fake show within a show, where essentially they imagine that someone had made this show back in the day, which was about a doctor who was also an exorcist at this haunted hospital. And it was like deliberate, like, can we make this show look as unintentionally bad as possible, but like do it deliberately? Like, what's the worst possible show that we could make? And it's so stupendously bad, but in a hilarious way. I strongly recommend. I don't know if it's available on any streaming services, but I think some of it's on YouTube. Go find Dark Place. It's astonishingly good at being bad. And if you like that kind of cheesy, wobbly set, dialogue's ever so slightly out of sync and everyone's kind of looking off camera because they're not quite sure what's going on, it replicates that feel of kind of the cheesy sci-fi and fantasy that we grew up with in the UK quite brilliantly. And I highly recommend it. And the whole thing is done. It's the idea is that they found this like lost show that had never been broadcast, and now they're showing it. And
that's fantastic.
The guy at the heart of it is this character called Garth Marenghi, who's a horror author, and he's a hacky horror author. He's so bad, like his books are terrible, but they say he somehow made this TV show which he starred in and wrote and produced and did the music for. Like it's basically just like a tremendous monument to his ego. And he's such a bad writer, and he doesn't understand anything at all about what makes stories interesting. His favorite, because they intersperse it with these like interviews that he gives about how great he thinks the show is. And my favorite line is, and he thinks this is a brag, I'm one of the few authors, I'm the only author you'll meet who's written more books than they've read. And I'm like, wow, that's not the brag thing. Or I know other authors that use subtext and they're all cowards. Like he's just the best at being awful. And they captured like that terrible age of British television and just all flimsily bad science fiction. If you get anything out of this interview with me today, go watch Garth Marenghi's Dark Place when you're done, and you'll thank me for it. It's so good.
I gotta go find that now.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Anyway, so writing, like screenwriting and writing books are very different forms of writing. What would you consider to be like the most challenging thing about books versus screenplays, and it's kind of which is your favorite to do, honestly?
I mean, they're both so different. It's like if you speak two different languages, like which is your favorite language? I wouldn't know, but that's how I kind of think about it. Like screenwriting was my first language. That's what I first became good at. It's kind of how I developed my craft as a writer. And if you've ever read a screenplay, it's a very, very specific subset of writing, right? There's a specific language and a cadence and a rhythm and a way that screenplays are meant to be kind of read and consumed. Is they're not the finished product, right? It's not the house, it's just the blueprint. You're the architect and you come up with the blueprint, but then people will come along and actually build that house and tell that story based on what you've written. But it also has to read well enough that someone will read it and go, oh, we should make a movie out of this, right? It has to sell itself as well. So it has to be an enjoyable read in its own right, but it's a very, very specific kind of writing. When I migrated over to writing a novel, I kind of wanted to do it because I wanted to see because it is such a different thing and it stands on its own. Like it's not the blueprint, it is the house, right? It's the novel is the finished product. And I found it, I think the thing I enjoyed most about it, and if you had to ask me like, which one do I like doing more? I think I still like writing screenplays more because I just love movies, but the process, I enjoyed writing the book more because when I write a screenplay, I never have any confidence that what I'm writing is what ultimately people are going to see. I've worked on 3 movies that have been produced in my career. One was almost exactly what I wrote, which is a small miracle. One was like kind of 50-50. and another one was almost nothing like I wrote. So you never know what's going to come out at the end of the Hollywood process. Like it's the chances of, if you want to be a storyteller, the chances of you being able to tell original story and have it come out of that filmmaking process in any way identifiable or recognizable as what you originally intended as a writer, very, very low odds. And because you get this, we've all heard about studio. You get the studio notes. Why can't the dog be a cat? And what if they died at the end? And it's like, and they're not necessarily like the best notes. But you have to find a way to kind of navigate that process, because as a writer in Hollywood, you are not, you have very little authority to kind of dictate what the story is going to be. There are always people above you: directors, producers, studio executives, actors. Like everyone typically has like more of a say than the writer does, which sounds weird, but it's just the way it is. And so when I wrote my first book, I came to that from a world of reading studio notes, where the reading between the lines, the message is always either do these notes or we'll find someone who will, right? Because writers get hired and replaced all the time. Every movie I've ever worked on, at some point another writer came in. But that's unheard of in books, right? The analogy I use, I imagine like Stephen King turned his new book into the publishers, and the publishers said, "Oh, we love this new book, Stephen. We don't love the ending, so we're going to have another writer come in and rewrite that part." Like, it sounds ridiculous, right? But that's what happens in Hollywood all the time. Writers are used to being replaceable and expendable, and it's one of the reasons why we're on strike right now, is because writers are just not respected by the people who rely on us, as the kind of the storytelling foundation of everything that they build. And we just want a bit more respect and money, basically. But when I wrote my first book, they assigned me an editor, and the editor came back with her notes. I think the character should say this instead of that, or that's a simplification, but a bunch of creative notes. And then most of them I agreed with. They were really, really smart notes. There were a couple I didn't agree with, and I said to her, like, I understand where you're coming from this note, but like, I don't want to do it. Like, I just want to have it the way that I wrote it. What do we do now? And she said, well, then just leave it. Then just leave it and don't do the note. Like, you don't have to. Like, these are just suggestions. You're the author. And that was like that was so weird for me to hear that, because again, in Hollywood, if you don't want to do a note, you either like bite the bullet and do it, or you find some way to kind of persuade them or convince them that your way of doing it is right. But that's really the only power you have as a writer in Hollywood, is the power to persuade the people who do have the decision-making ability that you're right. And if you can't do that, then you're stuck with writing a version of it that you don't like, or being replaced. So just the simple act of realizing that when I write a book, no one else can come in and rewrite me or fire me or force me to change something that I liked, was like a revelatory moment. And it's why now, I've written a second book, and why I think that I can see myself doing more in the future. I think screenwriting will always be my bread and butter. I think it's what I'm best at. And when things do go right and you see your name up on the big screen, it's magical. It's the best feeling in the world. But it's always tempered a little bit by that feeling of like, oh, they changed that thing that I really liked, and I wish I'd have had the power to control that and have it be the way that I wanted it to be. That's kind of the Faustian bargain that you enter into when you work in Hollywood. Yeah, we'll make your movie into like a big production, but like there's going to be a lot of creative compromises and sacrifices along the way. When I write a book, I'm answerable to nobody but my audience, and so I can do it the way that I want to do it. The other side of that, though, is a little bit scary, because oftentimes notes are really good. When I worked on Star Wars, I was surrounded by everyone in the room was smarter than me, and that made me feel really comfortable, because anytime I had a bad idea, somebody would check my math and say, well, here's why we shouldn't do that. I go, oh no, you're right, of course. And there's a whole process where I'm kind of basically idiot proofing all of my ideas. When I write a book, it's nice to have that authority, but then you're working without a net, essentially. Like, no one is really checking your math. Again, an editor might make suggestions, but I get to overrule them. And so the book coming out this week has actually been really both exciting and scary for me, because I'm really excited and people do seem to be liking it. But at the same time, it's like, oh man, like I'm doing this without a net. Like, at no point in the process was there a smarter person telling me that or saying, no, you have to change this. And so it's you assume all of that risk yourself. So there's a really long-winded way of answering the question, but it's like I can't say that I like one more than the other. But they're so different. I'm very grateful that I get to do both. And anytime I come up with an idea for a story, like with Gundog, I I might have tried to write this as a spec screenplay 10 years ago, but nobody would have made it because I'm not Christopher Nolan. I'm not J.J. Abrams. I'm not the kind of guy that says, here's my big original science fiction idea. Please spend $100 million making this. Like if I'd have written this as a screenplay, nobody would have made it as a movie. But if I write it as a book, it's much easier for me to get that published. And all I want to do is tell stories and get them in front of an audience in whatever medium that might be, whether it's a novel or a podcast or a comic book. Again, there have been other feature film ideas that I've had was like, no one's going to make this, so I'll do it as a comic book instead, and that did actually come out. So anyway, and get a story in front of an audience, that's always a win for me.
Oh yeah, the way you put it, I never thought about it that way before, because I'm very supportive of the strike, and I totally understand that they deserve more respect and more pay and everything like that. But it never occurred to me that that was a possibility, that they could just go, oh, you don't want to do it? You're gone.
Oh, I mean,
or just delete entire chunks. Like I don't know why that never clicked in my head.
It happens all the time, and I'll crack a little bit of the code for if you want. Anytime, and this is something that's defined by the Writers Guild. Go look at the credits for any movie where there's more than one writer. And so let's say, for example, like writer A and writer B wrote this movie. If those two names are separated by an ampersand, what that means is those two writers worked together as a team and wrote that script together. If they're separated by the letters A and D, what that means is one writer worked on the script, then they went away, and another writer came in afterwards and made and wrote their version. And the script is a concoction of those. But those like I've worked on, like for example, on Rogue One. There's some of the writers, like the two writers that came on after me. One I'm very friendly with and I know very well. The other guy I've barely ever even met. And so there's kind of a baton passing mentality where you basically take the script as far as you can go, and then someone else will come along with fresh legs and fresh ideas and fresh eyes and will make it better. But there's no guarantee that those writers ever even met or had any consultation or discussion at all. You just inherit the scripts. I've done it where I've come on after someone else left the project and I just inherited the script, and the studio will say, well, listen, we like this script, but we don't like this, and this, which is why we got rid of the other guy. Now, can you fix it? And it's not my favorite thing to do. I don't like being writer B. I don't like being the guy that comes in fixing other people's work. I like to kind of work from scratch. But yeah, there's any number of times, I think it was the Smurfs, or there was one movie that like famously had like when they did the arbitration, where sometimes the way that the studio wants to credit the writers is not what the writers think is fair. The Writers Guild actually ultimately has jurisdiction over that, and they'll put together an arbitration panel who will review all of the scripts. And every participating writer who contributed to the script in some way can make an argument why they should be credited. But there are rules about how many writers can be credited on a movie. You can't just credit 20 different writers. And so they have to figure out like, who are the 2 or 3 or 4 different writers who are going to actually make it onto the the poster and the movie itself, and that has huge career and financial implications as well, because you only get to participate in residuals and royalties if your name's actually on the movie. So it's very competitive, and writers are always like, you write these statements. This is why it's almost like a trial. This is why my name should be on the movie. And I remember one of my friends worked briefly as an arbiter. It was their job to kind of review all the scripts and ultimately decide like which of the writers deserve credit on the film, like whose work is most present in the finished film, essentially. And there's no way to kind of mathematically define that. There is kind of a formula for it, but you have to just kind of, they have very experienced writers doing it because they have to figure out like whose DNA is more in the movie than someone else's. On some of these big studio movies, you can have 20, 30 writers come and go, and they all want credit.
Wow.
But you can only credit 3 or 4, and you have to read 50, 60 different drafts of a script and figure out, well, who really has ownership of this, and comparing that to the finished script, who really has ownership of the finished movie. I've been through arbitration on every movie that I've written, and it's always like, no writer loves it. It's horrible. Again, nice thing about a book, one writer.
Yeah, you don't need to worry about that. You just that probably, oh my God, that gives me a whole lot to think about. There's a lot going on that I got to process here.
That's my life. Like one of the reasons why I was happy to write this as a book is like anytime I'm working on a big studio, especially like a big studio movie, I'm always waiting for someone to pull the rug out from under me. Either maybe I get fired and they get replaced, or the whole project goes down in flames. I worked on a big studio movie for 20th Century Fox a few years ago, wrote a script that everybody loved. Had a great director, had cast Idris Elba, Andy Serkis, $40 million in pre-production, costume sets built, 6 weeks from production, and then Disney bought Fox and killed the movie because they just didn't want to make it. And so these things can just get taken away from you. I mean, and it gets worse, right? I'm sure you heard about what happened with Batgirl, right? That was a finished film.
Yeah, and
right. And now you've got
86.
movies even being removed from streaming services, basically being like airbrushed out of existence, like Stalin or something. Oh, this movie I forget you ever saw Westworld. That's not on HBO anymore, right? It's like, what? It's so the idea that these things can be taken away from you is terrifying. And so what I liked about doing this as a book is like no one could ever pull the rug out from under me because I own the rug, right? There's no one above me. I don't. If you can find a way to do creative work without having to ask for anyone else's money or permission, or at least like reduce that to the bare minimum, that's when I think you'll be most satisfied. Because the golden rule is that he who has the gold makes the rules, right? And if I'm paying $100 million to make your movie, you better believe I'm going to have a say in it, right? Like I'm going to have opinions too, and that's valid. Right. But I think it's often the trickiest thing about Hollywood is that somebody said to me once that it's Hollywood is fundamentally kind of busted because it tries to marry art with commerce, and the two things don't belong together. And when they do collide, and it's irresistible force meets a movable object, commerce will ultimately always win. And so it's a tough business to be an artist in. And it's why I always say to people, if you want to be a screenwriter, if you want to write movies, really, really think about like what it is that you want to write. If you were that kid, who the kid from Cinema Paradiso or the kid from The Fabelmans, who's like looking up at the screen, just like in awe, like I was with Star Wars, going, oh my God, the magic of the movies. I'm being transported to this other place. I want to do that. If that's what you love, then by all means write movies. Just know it's going to be really hard and put up a fight. But if you just like to write and tell stories, consider writing almost anything else. Write novels, write comic books, write almost anything that will give you a higher percentage chance of getting your story in front of an audience in a way that you are proud of and recognizing and say, yeah, this is mine.
Very cool.
This went a whole different way than what I thought this question was going to.
No. This is kind of like a funny podcast, and I feel like I've just been a massive downer.
No, this is absolutely fantastic.
This is good stuff. One of the things that we love about this show is that we bring people on, Gary, and we have a preconceived idea of how things work in our little worlds. And sometimes we get to have that curtain peeled back, and we get to see what else is really going on in the world. And so it's kind of nice, especially amidst the middle of the strike and what's going on, to kind of understand a better position as to where you writers are at and what you're dealing with and what's going on. I think that helps a lot of everybody else because there's a lot of people out there who don't understand. They're just like, oh, a bunch of whiny millionaires are striking, and they don't understand what's at stake. They don't understand.
Well, yeah, and let me take the opportunity to correct that. I mean, even the actors, it's easy to point at actors. Well, aren't you rich actors? Well, like 95% of actors aren't rich, right? They're people that are struggling. You see that the ones that you see are by definition the most famous and the most rich. But like there's a million other. Oh, that guy, he was on. I know him from something. Like those guys aren't making very much money at all.
Right.
Good old Soldier B in the background.
And writers generally, again, it's some of us. I got 20 years in features, and I've written some big movies. I've done okay. But a lot of writers really, really struggle. A lot of them can't even make enough to, get their health insurance that the union. You have to make a minimum every year in order for your health insurance to kick in. And most writers and actors don't even make that minimum. And so there's a lot more going on with the strike in terms of writers' rooms and residuals and AI and a million different issues that are at stake. But they all stem from fundamentally the same problem, which is the billionaires that run Hollywood just don't have any respect for, and I think kind of resent the kind of the sweaty nerds that they rely on to tell the stories that make them all the money.
Right.
Nerds run the world.
Yeah. The geeks inherited the earth a long time ago. But I don't think the billionaire yacht havers like that very much.
Right. They haven't caught on yet. So
no, because I think they hate the fact that like we don't need them as much as they need us. Like again, you can go to YouTube, you can go anywhere, you can get your iPhone out and make a movie, and there's a million different ways to tell stories. But the big studio guys and the tech bros that now run half of Hollywood can't do it themselves. This is why they love the AI. Oh, well, we'll just make a computer will do it, right? No, it won't. I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of the stuff that AI has made. Like, it makes me laugh every time I'm on Twitter and some tech bro will go, "Can you believe that an AI made all of this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, because it looks like shit. I can easily believe that."
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, painting with 12 fingers.
Oh yeah, I love the hands. Did you see the other day? I can't believe this is true. It's like we're living in a parody universe now. Like, you can't tell this into an Onion headline anymore. Criminals are now
Oh no.
buying and using fake prosthetic fingers so that if they're caught on tape committing a crime, they can say, "Well, that's AI. Look, my fingers are all messed up."
Oh no.
That's brilliant
that's
in a way that it
horrible.
shouldn't be.
Yeah. That's so bad.
But it is scary. I don't know. Again, it's just a whole different conversation. But I think we are in a very post-truth world. There's a very funny Twitch channel right now, which is like a fake Trump and Biden debate, and it's all done using AI voice generation.
Oh yeah, I've seen this.
But like this is one of the things that AI is actually good at. It sounds flawless.
Mhm.
And
Right.
we're going to enter an age where, like, I don't know, audio and eventually video evidence in like criminal trials is going to be basically worthless because there's no way to just distinguish it from something that's been
Correct.
made in AI. The
Yeah.
Running Man was very prescient. Remember the Running Man where they just
Mhm.
faked the footage? Like that ended up being exactly where we are now. If you don't like reality, just change it.
Correct.
Just to quickly touch on that, like the Twitch channel you mentioned, or how they're like replicating voices. That also goes into the strike because one of the TikToks people I follow, they had their voice in a hot sauce commercial.
Mm-hmm.
They never did that commercial. That was all done with AI.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're trying to sue that company, and it's a whole thing.
And so, and writers are saying one of the things we want is like we don't just want AI not generating content, but like we don't want you using the stuff that we write to train AI to teach it how
Right.
to write.
Yeah.
And
Correct.
actors don't like having their voices used for things that they never consented to. So this is like a whole new thing that has to be contractually dealt with. One of the things that came out during the strike was actors telling stories about just like day players, right? People that show up for like bit parts in Marvel movies have to basically go in a truck where they get like their full face and body scanned and put into a 3D computer model, which Marvel then, because you signed a piece of paper, they then have like, you'll show up in a movie 20 years from now that you weren't even in, but you're like, oh wait, I'm in this movie? Yeah, because you signed that all away when you wanted to do a
Right.
Marvel movie, right? So you signed the piece of paper. Well, guess what? We own your rights now in perpetuity.
Yeah.
You were
And
one
because
and
it's not
done when
actually
you're-
you, we
Mhm.
don't owe you
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
money.
Yeah, you were one and done, but you thought you found out you were in 10 other movies. So
Yeah.
but
There was just quickly on that. Sorry, there was a person that was in WandaVision that showed up like 12 times in that final scene where everyone's running away from the town. She was there for like 30 minutes that day. Got scanned in,
Yeah.
and they
Mhm.
just copy pasted her the entire time.
I don't think we used AI at the time, but this is something that we were kind of like at the beginning of when we put Tarkin in Rogue One, right? Because that was computer
Mhm.
generated. And,
correct.
I made the argument that Tarkin should be in the movie because, it's right next to Star Wars and he's there on the Death Star. Like, I don't know how you
Right.
tell a story about the construction and destruction of the Death Star that takes place like 48 hours before A New Hope and Tarkin's not there. Like, it seems weird. But like, how do you do it? Do we like cast someone who looks like him, or like is it makeup? Like, what are we doing? So no, we're going to do it with CG. And they did this amazing stuff. And I think it looks incredible, but like some people are uncomfortable when and Princess Leia shows up at the end, which it looks amazing. But some people, it makes people uncomfortable, right? Because there's a part of your brain that knows that's not really them, right?
Mhm.
And it doesn't want to accept it. You get into the uncanny valley. And as the technology only gets better and better, I think the uncanny valley is just going to get weirder and weirder. And we get to a point where you just can't tell the difference anymore. And that uncertainty is going to be, we're already there. There's a bunch of stuff where I got fooled, like going around on social media. Oh my God, he really said that? No, actually he didn't. But like we
Right.
made it sound like he did. Like, who's to
Yeah.
know what's real anymore?
It's getting to be a scary time. But you did just mention one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. So I want to run this by you real quick. So you are part of the screenwriting crew that was for one of my absolute favorite movies of all time. To me, the best movie ever made is Empire Strikes Back, and Rogue One is easily in my top 5. And I love it from a storytelling standpoint. I love it from a cinematic standpoint. And the fact that it felt original trilogy. There was so much of what you guys did in that movie. You guys captured the era. You wrote it for that era, and it felt authentic to the time and the place for where it belonged. And so I fell in love with that movie instantly. And as a side note, as a massive Star Wars fan, this is the only Star Wars movie where I have run out of the theater to my car, sped home so that I could go put in my Blu-ray of A New Hope so I could see the transition from what happens at the end of Rogue One. Even though I knew what was coming in A New Hope, I still had to see it. I had to let my mind complete it. And
I love that. It's such a great, because I didn't see it until it was all cut together and done. I knew where it was going, but I didn't see it until it was all done. Like the last few minutes, realize you're actually now watching the beginning of Star Wars. It's like I got choked up when I first saw it.
Yeah,
I know there are people that have actually like spliced them together, right? You can watch it as like a 4-hour movie, and they put this connective tissue in, which is amazing. And I never get tired of hearing people that they say that they liked it. It was definitely, I felt like I liked it. I would have done anything in the Star Wars universe. I didn't like propose Rogue One. That was John Knoll. They just gave me the idea to work with. And I was really grateful because again, the original trilogy, that's the pop music that was around when I was growing up, right? Again, right. Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, those are the movies that kind of made me want to do this. And so to be able to work in that corner of the timeline where that was so special to me was really a great privilege. But it was also really nerve-wracking because like you don't want, like, don't mess. That was the thing when it was announced I was doing, I got like my phone of course blew up, and every single message there was two sides to it. One was, oh my God, this is amazing, congratulations. The second one was, don't screw this up.
Don't screw it up.
they didn't say screw this up, but you told me I had to moderate my language. And that was in my head every morning when I went to work. Don't F this up, don't F this up. And that will keep you honest. Because if you make a bad Star Wars movie, like it's going to follow. I'm at Comic-Con 20 years from now. Oh, you're the guy that wrote that Star Wars movie I hated. You ruined my childhood, etc., etc. You don't want to be that guy. And so, fortunately, it came out. And I always make sure not to take too much credit. I was one of only 4 writers on the movie, and Gareth and ILM and all the brilliant actors. Like they all made the movie what it was. I just have a little piece of it. I'll happily take some credit for it, but only a little piece. But just to even be a small part of something that is so well liked, and I don't know, different people have different views of this. I keep my views of the other movies to myself because we're all one big family. I know many of the other filmmakers.
Sure, understood.
But like, I think most people would probably say that the Disney era Star Wars movies have been a bit of a mixed bag. And I just consider myself fortunate to be being associated with the one that seems to be kind of broadly the most well liked. I think IGN did a poll recently, which is your favorite of the Disney era Star Wars movies, and Rogue One won it with like 40% of the vote. Like it wasn't even close; it was a landslide.
Yeah, I'll say it should be a landslide.
And so that is a relief, first of all, again, because we didn't screw up. We did good, I think, and people liked it. And it's been my. I could work in Hollywood for another 40 years, and it's very unlikely that anything's going to be in front of Rogue One on my resume, right? Because what's bigger than that? And it was terrifying to think about. Like when I wrote the Book of Eli, I had no expectation like how big the movie was going to be. It had Denzel Washington and stuff, so people are going to see it, but like not everyone's necessarily going to see it. When you work on a new star, I mean, at one point I remember thinking like Steven Spielberg's going to see this movie. Like he just is, right? It's a Star Wars film.
Correct.
George Lucas is going to see this movie, and like that's terrifying, and it's really hard to get out of your own head and silence that inner critic when you're working on something where like the stakes are that high.
So I went into that movie with incredibly low expectations because I was so nervous of setting myself up into a point where it was going to be a letdown, because the trailers for it had looked so good, and I liked the idea of getting to this point where we saw what was going to happen right before A New Hope, and I just thought that time frame should be so cool. But I was like, in my brain, I'm like, don't get worked up about it. It might suck. And by the end of it, I was literally like pushing my family out of the theater so that we could get home because I wanted to see A New Hope so badly.
And I think we benefited a little bit from that, like with JJ's movie, because it was the first one. Right? It was episode 7, right? And it's the picking up the main storyline 30 years later or whatever. There was a lot on the line, and Han Solo and the Falcon and all the things that people wanted to see. Like I think the expectation in the trailer for that was really cool as well. So the expectations were super, super high.
Mhm.
Right.
We had the benefit because we were this odd little thing and nobody quite knew what it was, and there was a lot of discussions about making sure that people understood that this wasn't one of the saga films, that
Right.
this was a
Correct.
stand, because we were the first standalone. And we had to, there was a marketing question, like, how do we make this? There were a lot of questions, like, is there going to be an opening crawl? Are we going to have like the classic Star Wars fanfare? Is it going to have like all the furniture of the Star Wars films, or do we want to try and do something different? And what we realized, what Lucasfilm really encouraged us to do was like do something different. Like, we want these to be distinguished from the saga film. So there is no opening crawl, right? The movie, like from the very beginning, the fact that the movie opens in a different way is kind of like telling you, it just kind of goes bam, right, a long time ago,
Right.
and you know right away, oh, this isn't like the Star Wars movies that you grew up with. And I think it still has that DNA. It still feels like a Star Wars film, but we were able to do things that just weren't in the language of Star Wars films before. Like, so we didn't have any of the iris wipes or any of the kind of the edits that make Star Wars films that George originally kind of took from Flash Gordon. We do a time jump, right? There's a big time jump, right? Jyn Erso is a child, and then like it's like whatever it is 20 years later. Star Wars movies had never done that, and I remember sitting there, I was so ingrained in like the language of it and the Star Wars movies I grew up with. Like, I want to do it this way because originally I pitched this idea of like showing Jyn as a child and Saw Gerrera and Krennic coming to get her dad and all that stuff. It's like, but in order to do that, we're going to have to do a time jump. Like, can we do that? Like, it's Star Wars. Star Wars has never done that. And what I kept hearing back, and eventually I got on board with, people saying the fact that Star Wars has never done it is why we should be doing it, right? We should be like branching out and like not feeling that we're constrained. I think with JJ, I think in anything, like JJ was probably a little bit more constrained in that you do have to do the wipes. You can't get wacky with it. Like, people still want Star Wars comfort food, right? They want their spaghetti and meatballs. They want the Star Wars that they know and love.
Right.
Whereas with Rogue One, we could be a little bit more, hey, try this weird sushi, try something you've never liked before. You tried before, you might like it. And it worked, but it was a very high risk, high reward proposition to depart from the visual language of Star Wars storytelling to the extent that we did.
So I've been a big gamer for most of my life. Obviously, incredible stories are probably the most important thing to a game, but it's the score that sets the tone. Games like The Last of Us, Destiny, God of War, some of the best soundtracks I've ever heard in a game. What, in your opinion, is necessary for the score of a video game, and what is your favorite video game like soundtrack?
I'm so glad you asked, because this genuinely allows me to back into yet another shameless plug. But one of my favorite video games of all time also has one of my favorite soundtracks, and it's Journey on the PlayStation. If you ever played Journey,
yes,
it's such a beautiful game.
I love Journey.
And it has this incredible soundtrack written by a guy called Austin Wintory, who's a good friend of mine. He actually wrote the music for the Gundog audiobook. And I went to him because he wrote one of my all-time favorite soundtracks, and God knows how I got him to do it, but he put together a full orchestra and did this amazing soundtrack. But yeah, I think, games, it's interesting. Back in the day, games weren't dependent on story, right? Sorry, Mario. Oh, thank you, Mario, but the princess is in another castle. Like, that's as good as storytelling got. Now, again, with things like The Last of Us, yeah, we do expect games to deliver story, right? And good characters, and games will get dinged if they don't have good stories, and rightly so, because the expectation has been set by these amazing games like The Last of Us and Uncharted, and just really cool games. I think so I think the rules are very similar to what makes a good movie soundtrack. It's what's going to evoke the mood, what sets the tone, what takes you to that place, right? What is it that puts you in that mindset? And I think game composer, Michael Giacchino, who did the music for Rogue One and for a lot of Marvel movies, and is now one of the biggest composers in Hollywood, started as a video game guy. He used to write video game soundtracks, and his stuff was amazing even then. When I met him at the Rogue One premiere, I was like, oh man, I love the soundtrack you did for Medal of Honor Allied Assault back in the days. Oh, you remember that? Like, he was really amazed that somebody would remember like his early video game work. But yeah, I think it's no surprise that we're seeing like more video game composers kind of migrating into film work, because they're very interchangeable.
There you go. I didn't even know that would connect back, but there you go.
I'll always, I trust me, I'll always find a way to get back to what I'm plugging. But in that case, you made it easy.
Oh, hey, well, sometimes we got to set them up so you can knock them down. All right, Gary, this is our last question for you. We call it our silly question, and we used to ask a variety of things, and we tried quizzes for a while, but we got destroyed by Sam Witwer, and we decided that was probably not in our best interest.
Yeah, that wasn't smart. Yeah.
No, that was really dumb. Yeah, he was answering the questions before we could finish them. So yeah, so we decided to start asking silly questions, and we were asking a variety of them. But lately we've settled on this one because we think that it's a shame that adults don't get asked this question anymore. Gary Whitta, what's your favorite dinosaur?
Triceratops. Didn't even have to think about it.
It's a good choice.
That's my favorite as well. I've always loved
really?
them.
Good,
Yeah.
I'm glad. I
Yeah.
feel like the herbivores don't get enough credit.
Mhm.
I always thought they were cool because they were when I liked them as a kid because I liked rhinos.
Right.
And, you
And
know-
they're the most like a rhino.
Right, and there was a triple rhino.
Rhino
and so to
dino.
me, yeah, it was
Yeah.
so.
I like Stegosaurus as well, but Triceratops. Like when they had the Triceratops in Jurassic Park, I was really glad they put that in there.
Yeah, very cool.
Mhm.
Gary, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Where can our viewers and our listeners find out more about your work and what you've got coming?
You can find me on social media. I'm very active. I'm one of those extremely online people. You can find me on Twitter. I'm just Gary Whitta, GaryWhitta. Also, I'm Gary Whitta on Instagram. I'm Gary Whitta on YouTube and Blue Sky, and I'm just G Whitta, GWHITTA on Instagram and Threads, and I'm Gary Whitta on TikTok. I'm trying to get something going on TikTok. It's slow because I'm like 40 years too old to be on TikTok. But I'm doing my best. You can find me on TikTok as well at Gary Whitta.
Well, thanks. We'll make sure to get those put in our show description with all the links and everything, so our viewers and listeners can check you out.
Yeah, and the book's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you might go find books. We have an ebook as well if you prefer to read on Kindle or whatever. iBooks. It's just type Gundog into any Amazon thing, and if you like the audiobook, go find it on Audible or on podcast services. That version's free.
Excellent. Well, we'll make sure that we get those in there for you, Gary. And we want to remind everybody that subscribing is the single most important thing that you can do to ensure that we get more amazing guests like Gary Whitta here today and have these funny moments for you to be able to listen to. So please subscribe. It helps us well more than we can ever really tell you. And be sure to check out Gary's work as well. You'll find those down in the show notes, just right down under there. So make sure you click on those and go check out his books, his works, everything else. And if for whatever reason, if you are not happy with the content of our show today, please feel free to lodge a complaint with the head of our complaint department. That, of course, is Director Krennic. Unless, of course, Grand Moff Tarkin steps in to take credit for what Krennic has accomplished. Not that there's a history of that happening or anything. But whether it's Krennic or Tarkin taking over, send 3 copies of your complaint to the ISB. They will either send out 1 squad of Death Troopers or 1 highly irritated Inquisitor. Either way, the future is not bright for whoever has brought about your level of ire. Just keep in mind that the Empire is completely willing to enforce the saying, snitches get stitches. So there's that. So maybe think about it before you hit that enter button. All right, Gary, thank you so much. Thanks for playing along and being our guest today on the FSF Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Copyright 2023 FSF Podcast.
Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Podcast. The views expressed by the guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpodcast.com. Original music by Jordan Michaels.